Welcome to a survival expert on. And so this episode, we are going to be talking about the once mysterious death of a family and their dog, a husband and wife and their dog, just outside Yosemite on the National Forest. It's the Gerrish Ching incident. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I served as a expert witness for the Mariposa County Sheriff. And in their words, I was key in providing them with information that led to the closure of the case. And over 30 law enforcement agencies were involved in this. So this is a very, very tragic tale, and it's strange for me to talk about something like this because, we're talking about a very important topic here. So people lost their lives and people lost their family members. But let's get into what happened. So I started seeing news articles all over the internet about this mysterious death. A man, a woman, their dog, their baby, all gone. And no one really knew what happened. The autopsy results were inconclusive. People were talking about algae toxins in the water, which I really didn't think it would be that. And it even started to get to like a metaphysical thing. People were talking about all kinds of absurd things, right? Like some kind of otherworldly thing or aliens, right? And it's, what does one scientist say? It's never aliens, right? So there was all kinds of things. And they even shut down the trail that they were on, the Savage Lundy Trail, and surrounding trails due to an unknown hazard. I think they may have said it was a biological hazard, something like that. So it was maybe the fourth or fifth article on the subject where I finally saw them mention the heat, and that's when I had a bit of an aha moment. And a chain of events kind of developed in my mind, and I contacted the sheriff, and to say something about them, they actually responded, and they responded very quickly, and they wanted to talk. And I told them, I think I know why there's confusion, and I think I know what you're going to tell me about the incident before you do. And they did provide me with the autopsy results, the investigative reports, the positions they found, their mortal remains in, all of that. And so I had guessed, and it turned out to be correct, that this was exertional heat stroke. So these people had pushed themselves to death in the heat. Once I saw there was a baby involved, it made it more clear, and I figured that there was so much confusion because, they were going to find the bodies scattered, right? The bodies were not going to be just like right next to each other. And doing an autopsy for exertional heat stroke is hard because it doesn't always have to do with dehydration. So if someone dies of dehydration, right, that is hypovolemic shock. Believe it or not, you don't have enough blood volume to stay alive, okay? They can look at things like the fluid in your eyeballs, the remaining fluid in your eyeballs, things like that, and they can find out if you had died by dehydration. But exertional heat stroke, you can be the most hydrated person in the world, but if you push your body too hard, too fast in that kind of heat, then it doesn't matter how hydrated you are. If you are building heat faster than you can remove it in your system with circulation, sweating, all that, then if it gets to a critical level, if your brain gets around 105, right, your organs, your brain, all that, it's going to shut down. Okay, so of course it's going to happen faster if you're dehydrated, if you're not very well hydrated. If you're not acclimated to the heat, it's going to happen faster. But it can happen to the best of us. And indeed, if you look at this kind of thing, it's usually athletes, soldiers, firefighters, things like that, that are the ones to succumb to this. Every once in a while, some young guy playing football in Texas when it's hot and humid, right? Every once in a while, a soldier down here in Camp Pendleton, a Marine down there in Camp Pendleton, right? Every once in a while, a firefighter on the fire line will go down, because these are people that, they want to push themselves to that extreme level. So what it seems happened with them, and what has been kind of agreed upon, was the child started to go down first, right? So an infant like they had is going to be a lot more vulnerable to extreme heat stress, right? They're not going to be as acclimated as an adult. And before you get there blaming the parents and thinking all kinds like, oh, they're so stupid and all this, for one, I'm not going to speak ill of the dead. That's not my style, okay? If I had a child right now, a young child, I would take them out hiking right away, right? When they started on the hike, it was in the 70s, okay? Now, it was an 8-mile hike that they were doing, part of a larger loop, but they wound up on the Savage Lundy Trail. And unfortunately, when they had researched the trail, the pics and all showed a lot of shade and things, but a fire, I believe it was the Ferguson fire, had gone through there a couple years before and had burned up all the shade on the areas that they hiked in. So as later times, right, as it started to hit noon, things like that, it started to get hotter, and it started to get in excess of 100 degrees. And now the last area that they had to hike up was steep, and it was what we call a south aspect, right? So in the northern hemisphere on Earth, so we're going to say my fist is the Earth, right? In the northern hemisphere, which we're in North America, right, of course, the south face, the south aspect of the mountains, right? So now my hand's a mountain, right? So this is the north side, this is the south side, okay? Receives the most direct sunlight, okay? Especially the southwest face gets heated up the most, and I learned this as a wildland firefighter. We knew when fires were burning up, the southwest ridgeline is the one that received the most direct light, the fire activity was going to be much worse, right? And if you've ever been driving down and you see snow on one side of the mountain, right, and there's not on the other, it's because you're looking at the north and south aspects. It's lightly brushy on one side, thick brush or trees on the other. It's because you're looking at the north and south aspects, okay? The north aspect doesn't get as much sunlight, so the moisture doesn't evaporate as quickly, right? So you generally have more dense vegetation there. And on the south aspects, you have more dry vegetation. That's how that works, right? So they were receiving the last part of their hike, very direct sunlight. And they had worked their way to around 4,000 feet and back down to 2,000, all that. But once you get in the thousands of feet, there is a phenomenon called irradiance, right? So the sunlight has less atmosphere to travel through, right? And if you've ever, any new mountaineers, right? So you have a sunny day on the mountain, you have the snow reflecting the sunlight, right? You get hot, so you may strip down to ladies with a nice sports bra, guys maybe a short sleeve thermal, and you're up at 10, 12,000 feet. Some of you guys may be up 14, 15 or more thousand feet. And then lo and behold, in 30, 45 minutes, you have a blistering sunburn, just like you had too many margaritas and fell asleep on the beach, right? Because those higher altitudes, right, the irradiance is going to give you stronger sunlight. And that's the way heat works. If you've ever seen people sweating under stage lights, they say if you're on stage under those powerful lights, you'll sweat a lot quicker, right? Because light generates heat. The UV light from the sun goes through the atmosphere, and once it comes into contact with a person, their clothing, vegetation, all that, it converts to infrared, and that, my friends, is heat. Okay, heat energy. So you're going to get hotter faster at similar temperatures the higher up you go. You will get hotter and sunburn faster at 10,000 feet if it's 99 than you will at sea level if it's 99, and that's because of irradiance. And that was another contributing factor, right? No shade, very unlikely to be acclimated. See, listen, even if you live in Phoenix, Arizona, gets 120 and all this all the time, you're probably not acclimated to the heat, because what do we do as modern humans? We go from our air-conditioned house to our air-conditioned car to our air-conditioned job and repeat back home, right? We're not really, and we go out of our way to avoid working out in these high heat temperatures. And you need to be exposed to the high heat, to these temperatures, doing physical exercise if you want to acclimate to them. This was a big thing in wildland fire, right? So if we have a real hot fire burning here in SoCal, and we have hotshot crews, fire crews coming in from all over the country, right, to help us out, and we have a lot of fires. So if we have a crew down from the coast in Oregon or Washington, where it's going to be much cooler, they're used to 70, 80 degree temperatures where they are, we're not going to put them on the most critical pieces of line where we need the fastest production, where it's 100 plus right away. If you're a good manager, you're going to wait till they're there at least 5 days, and then you can put them on the more critical, need fast production pieces of line. Because if you're an athlete, okay, like these guys are in shape like an athlete, like a professional athlete, within 5 days of exercising that heat, you'll be acclimated like a native, okay? So they're very likely a lack of acclimation to that kind of heat. Not enough water. They had less than 3 liters of water for the mother, the father, the baby, and the dog, right, who all did perish. So not enough water, right? Probably didn't plan, maybe didn't check the weather. Probably weren't dressed for that kind of heat. And so for dressing for that kind of solar exposure, what we want is, so I'm in a long sleeve black hoodie right here with my logo on it, right? If I'm going to be out in direct sunlight, again, remember, they were likely expecting shade, right? The pictures they had seen of the trail on their app and all that, they did not know the trees had been burned up not that long before they went, right? So what you want is, again, remember what I said. The UV light comes down from the sun, hits your body, converts to infrared. Now, it's not about sunblock, right? Because if you're wearing sunblock, you might not burn, but it's still, the light's going to hit your skin's going to heat up. So you want a loose-fitting, long-sleeve, breathable, white shirt, okay? White shirt. Preferably with little ventilation things like these Columbia fishing shirts and stuff. I use those on desert training all the time. We want white because that reflects the UV light a bit, right? So we have less of that UV to infrared transfer taking place. And indeed, if you try this out, you have a billowing, a loose fitting, right? Because the shirt's heating up, so we don't want it on our skin. We don't want skin contact. If you have a loose fitting white shirt, you're out hiking in the direct sun for a while, 90s, 100s, whatever. Feel your shirt. You're with someone with a dark colored shirt, feel their shirt. See an amazing difference. Now for the head, right, which is a big thing with releasing body heat in the body, we want a wide brimmed hat to cast shade on our face and neck. And often a good desert hiking hat, the brim will be longer in the back because we're always looking down, right? We're always looking down. So that will expose your neck. So a wide brimmed hat, even longer in the back, to protect our head and neck from the sun, preferably ventilated and not tight on the head, because remember, that fabric is heating up, right? So the lightest color you can get for your hat, wide brim for your face and neck. And then they don't really make white hiking pants, right? But you can get sand colored, a very light tan. Again, loose fitting. If they have the knee zips, we don't want to take, so some of these hiking pants you can convert to shorts. You unzip the lower leg. Now what you can do is unzip it partially, leave the lower leg on, and just unzip it partially to let that hot air that the pants are storing pop out, right? And you will be able to go remarkably farther in the heat than if you weren't dressed for it. Okay, so clothing is a big thing. And having extra water or cold packs, whenever I know I'm taking clients, because I'm a survival instructor, first and foremost. Whenever I know I'm taking clients out in a high temperatures, I freeze what we call shamog or kafaya, you know, the tactical scarves the cool tactical guys wear, right? The arabesque scarf. I take one of those and I soak it with water, fold it up real tiny so I can carry it, and I freeze it overnight in the freezer, okay? Because they're very, very large. They'll cover your whole torso and then some. and then I wrap it in tin foil, okay, and I stick it in a Ziploc bag and throw it in my pack, and it'll stay frozen for a couple days in my pack. So if I ever spot someone getting a little too hot, I can drape the frozen shamog across their whole upper body, pour water through it, and it's like pouring ice water down their body. And indeed, the best thing you can do if someone is having any kind of heat stroke, any kind of severe heat issue, is immediate ice water submersion, right? If we can't dip them in ice water, and don't think shock, oh, they'll shock the system. That's not how shock works. That's not what shock is. Shock is defined as inadequate perfusion to sustain life. And sometimes say inadequate perfusion to the brain, right? Because you're not dead until you're brain dead. Perfusion is oxygen-rich blood flow. Okay, so shock is a lack of oxygen-rich blood flow. Okay, so you're not going to cut off oxygen-rich blood flow by rapid cooling. This is the primary way to help with these kinds of things. And that's why on the sidelines of some football team, especially a professional football team, high-level sports, if they're doing anything in the summer, they'll have ice baths there ready to go. You need immediate, the best immersion, the best cooling you can get. So this is like pouring ice water all over the body so we can bring down the temperature quick before their brain has time to shut off. Because once their body gets too hot, the body's natural cooling systems, natural ways that it adapts and adjusts to provide cooling, they fail. They fail completely, and then the person needs external cooling. It's the only way to cool them down. And at that point, they're dying. At that point, they may die despite your best efforts. That's why you always want to avoid it. Okay, you want to take micro breaks when you're working in that heat. You want to sip water constantly. Okay, you want cold packs. You want something like a frozen shamog, right? So if you get too hot, you can cool yourself down rapidly. Cold packs are easy to carry, especially on a day hike. So they were on a day hike. They were on an 8-mile hike. Okay, and if they're experienced hikers, you know, they probably thought they'd be done in 3-4 hours. They might not have thought that they'd be there into the hotter part of the day. I believe they started off at like 7-something in the morning. Okay, and day hikers are the least likely to carry any kind of emergency GPS beacon. They tried to get texts out. They tried to get 911 calls out, but there was just no reception. Now I'm not exactly sponsored by iPhone or anyone for that matter. I don't have a big social media following, anything like that. But the new iPhones now with the built-in GPS communications, that's saving a lot of lives. Sadly, it was before then. Okay, so I'm getting in a little bit of the science of what happened here. So I hope you can, if someone does watch this podcast, they can learn from this. Maybe prevent a heat injury themselves, right? So what likely happened? What likely happened? The plausible chain of events. Plausible chain of events is the child started to succumb first. And if you have a child and you love your child, a newborn, it's going to fire you up. It's going to fire you up. And they were roughly a mile. Here's the thing. They're roughly, and this was probably a big contributor, they're roughly a mile from their vehicle where they perished. Right? So they couldn't get help. They knew they couldn't get help, so they had to push it because they didn't want to lose their child. Right? So the child starts to come, so they start to push it, and now they're getting hotter. And what it looked like was the father went down, started to go down a little more seriously after the child, right? And so there's no good shade. They only had broken shade, so they climbed down off the trail a little bit into some broken shade for relief. And the mother, who was, I think, around 10 years younger than the father, right? So it explains, she tried to press on, and she tried to save them. Right? When they couldn't go anymore, she spent the last remaining bits of her life trying to save them. Right? And another thing that made the case more mysterious, of course, was in her last moment, she tried to scramble for some broken shade as well. Burned up bushes and scrub, right? So that scratched her up. Right? Now, if you don't know, if you just find the bodies like this, it can lead to all kinds of things. Were they being chased? Were the scratches from the trees or for something else, right? People were wondering about the river water, creek water, whatever there, that had what's called a cyanotoxin. So there is cyanobacteria, right? The algae, if you will, that grows in these streams in the West. That when they slow down in the summer, when there's less water, they're slower, they heat up. It provides a better environment for cyanobacteria, harmful algae blooms, HABs, if you will, to grow. If you've ever heard of red tide, that is a harmful algae bloom. Now, the cyanobacteria gives off a cyanotoxin. Now, there was a particularly dangerous one in that water, but no one's really ever died from that. So, I heard in some of the news articles, I had heard about that, and I figured that is very unlikely to be the case. And also, it's very steep and down quite a ways to get to the water where that was, and it was unlikely someone would make an attempt on that. So, yeah, they were found spread apart because they all gave it, and the dog too, right? We know how dogs are. They all gave it 100% for each other. And that's why I'll say I will, for the sake of this, talk about what they could have done. I'm not going to say what they should have done because I wasn't there. It's sad, right? They gave it 100%. And yeah, that's a big deal. It's a big deal. That kind of giving your life for your family like that, I'm not going to say I'm a religious guy or whatever, but if there's if there is a Valhalla or whatever, I hope they're there, right? Because they earned it for each other. It's a big deal to go for your family like that. So yeah, I got a hold of the sheriff because I don't know if you ever lost someone and you didn't get closure. It sucks, right? It sucks really bad. So I threw my hat in the ring, and you can see once they release the reports, you can see some news stories mentioned kind of an anonymous survival expert, and some of the quotes from my emails with them, and they wrote me a fine letter, which is on my website, that you can see what they thought my contribution was to the case, right? So that's why it was mysterious. There was a lot of factors at play. The body's spread out, scratches on the mother as she struggled to stay alive. Why they pushed it so hard, because the baby went down first and they weren't that far from the vehicle and they knew it. All they had to do is get back to the vehicle and they were going to be okay, right? And you know what? No one really takes survival training. It's looked... My fridge just came on. I don't know if the mic's picking that up. The ice maker's going crazy right now. This is solemn. Refrigerator, stop it. So, you don't have to take it with me. I'm not just plugging myself. I haven't mentioned the website address, whatever. I'll do it at the end. But no one really takes survival training. It's seen as a bit of a gimmick, right? It's seen as, what do they call survivalists, right? Weirdos, things like that. And that's where my operation differs, is I am only here to train you to serve as your own first responder when you are far from help. Okay, we have urban disaster as well. We have all kinds of medical training. You get certified in wilderness first aid, which is very, very different than regular first aid. I teach a 16-hour certification course, emergency oxygen administration, advanced bleeding control, basic life support, EpiPen administration. I'm an instructor certifier in all these, right? If you take my survival course, we're going to have you sling one arm and try and make a fire with just one arm. We're going to sling the other arm, have you make a signal with just one arm. We're going to make you carry patients up the mountain at 7,000 feet. Okay, we're going to push you hard. We're going to recreate stress so you're ready when you leave. Okay, so get training. You don't have to get it from me. Find a good school wherever you are and get training. Okay, so you can avoid these kinds of situations for yourself and your loved ones. Okay. So what could someone in their circumstance do? So for one, you have to stop it early. Remember I told you, if your body systems catastrophically fail, you need external cooling. You can't, if you get too hot, your body won't cool itself anymore. It all shuts off. Okay, your brain shuts off too. Okay, so I've helped someone before where they're just speaking gibberish. They don't know who they are, where they are. Their brain is shut off. Okay? So, and they had lots of water on them. But they pushed themselves so hard. This was a fellow firefighter. They pushed themselves so hard, they were in a high state of exertional heat stress, where they didn't even have the wherewithal anymore to step 10 feet in the shade. They're only 10 feet from the shade, take off their Nomex. They had over a gallon of water on them. They could have poured water all over them, drank water, and been fine. But they pushed themselves to their brain shut off, and then it's too late. So you have to recognize the signs and symptoms early, right? Rapid heart rate. Even though you're not breathing too hard, rapid heart rate. Why would the heart speed up? Again, perfusion, right? So blood regulates body temperature. Okay, so you'll see people's skin sometimes get beet red in the initial stages of getting too hot. And why is that? Because the heart's beating more rapidly to speed up blood flow around the organs where your blood picks up the heat. The blood vessel then gets to the surface of the skin and it dilates, and the skin acts as a radiator to radiate the heat off. You start sweating profusely in the initial stages. Once you run out of water, right, you stop. Initial stages, you start sweating profusely. Why? Because as the sweat evaporates, it cools you. Evaporative cooling, right? So a heart rate that doesn't match the breath rate, flush red skin, excessive sweating, right? Start to get headache, nausea. When you have to slow down because you're too hot, okay, when you start to think, oh, wow, I should slow down, I can't go as fast anymore, you need to follow the 4 S's. Stop, shade up, shed clothing, sip water. Okay? See how shed clothing is after shade up? Right? Because remember, UV light from the sun creates the heat. Once you're in the shade, you don't need protection from the light. You can shed clothing so that instead of the evaporative cooling taking place on your clothing, it could take place on the skin's surface directly, and we can expose that wonderful radiator that is the human skin surface. Okay? And we say sip water because when you're getting really hot, if you start to chug it, it can come right back up. Now, I don't know how much water you have, but it sucks to throw it up, right? You need good blood volume. You want to be fully hydrated, so you have good blood volume, so you can get all those blood vessels dilated at the surface of the skin in high volume, and act as an even better radiator. And hot tip, it's just as important in the cold because, remember, blood regulates body temperature. It doesn't just cool you, it warms you, right? So if you don't have good blood volume, right, when your body gets too cold, the internal organs aren't able to stay warm, it restricts blood flow to non-essential areas of the body. That's why you see frostbite first taking place on fingertips, tips of the nose, tips of the ears. So if you're already dehydrated, if you already have low blood volume, it's going to be even worse. Okay, now the AC is coming on. I don't know if you hear that. It's automatic. So these are a few survival tips, right? So you start to get that heat stress, stop, shade up, sip water, shed clothing. Okay? Let your body temperature come down, then progress. Okay, if you have your cold packs, pop one. First we put them on the neck, then the armpits, then the groin, against the skin under the clothing. Why? Because the arteries are at their closest to the surface there. Okay, so of course we can feel the carotid artery on our neck, right? So you put a cold pack on your neck. We have kind of an inline cooling method, cooling the brain. You have a brachial pulse right here, right? It's easy to feel under your arm there. That's actually, if you're checking the pulse on a baby, that's where you check brachial pulse, okay? We don't want to push on their little baby necks. So after the neck, we put them under there, right? Because it's closer to the brain, to the core. Then from there, we go femoral artery in the crotch. You can feel a femoral pulse there. It's really hard. If you're not a medical professional, it'll be difficult for you to find it. But you can feel that pulse there, right? But it's deeper. It's harder to cool there. So if you only have one cold pack, neck, you have 3 cold packs under the arms. You have 5 cold packs in the crotch, okay? If you feel the need to carry cold packs, always carry at least 3, and check out that frozen shamog tip, okay? So you gotta cool it down. And they say don't ration water. I disagree with everyone who says that. I don't care where you get that information from. I know my heat stress. I was the Fireline EMT, crew EMT on several wildland firefighting crews, Type 1 crews in California, where we are covered head to toe in Nomex. We got 60, 70 pounds of gear on, and we're cutting fire line up a steep mountain, over 100% grade, as fast as your average person can walk up it in high 90s, 100-degree temperatures, okay? I've dealt with it a lot. So the reason, where that reasoning comes from, that mistaken reasoning, why don't ration water, is if you research this, you'll see they find people dead in the heat, and they still have half a bottle of water, and they think, oh, they must have been rationing the water. That is ridiculous. Thirst is a very, very powerful motivator. You'll drink a toilet dry before you die of thirst. Okay, it's a very powerful motivator. The mistake was those people died from exertional heat stress, not dehydration. Okay, if they found them dead in Arizona heat, their dirt bike broke down, they could see the road, they're trying to walk back to the road, they didn't take all their stuff off, they find them dead, they got a half water bottle, that's because they died from exertional heat stress. I think I can do it. I'm almost there. Brain turns off, no good to themselves anymore. Right? And they die and they have that water bottle. But with exertional heat stress, drinking that half liter most likely was going to do nothing. You know, stop, shade up, shed clothing, sip water. Okay? So make that water last, and you'll say, well, if I'm going to ration it, when do I know to drink? When the symptoms of the heat stress start to become too severe, your throat's dry, you get headache, you get nausea, sip some water. Okay, sip some water. If you're stuck 10 hours in 100-degree temperatures, you have half a liter. So you're going to say, I'm thirsty, so I'm just going to guzzle it all right then? And now you got 9 hours and 55 minutes with no water? I don't think so. Okay, so get that rationale out of your brain. You know, tell them to email me. Okay. So yeah, knock it down, and then maybe if you can find shade in that situation, right? Whoever is the better hiker takes the cell phone, takes part of the water, right? Half the water at least. They leave the people that are doing worse off in the shade there. So the baby, the dog, either mom or dad stays with the baby and the dog in the best shaded spot. The other one, with the remaining water, takes it slow and steady with lots of shade breaks up the hill until they get reception. Okay? That is a way to work this. I'm not going to say that's what they should have done. I don't know if they could have done that. Right? Because they gave it their best. So that is a way to avoid a situation like that. So for one, it's preparing, knowing the weather throughout the day, knowing the elevation, okay, knowing the terrain, dressing for the weather, having knowledge of how to dress, the wide-brimmed hat, light color, the white shirt that's breathable, the lightest colored pants you can get with the knee zips, knowing that. And hydration, people always say, oh, I drank a bunch of water last night. I'm ready, right? It takes at least 3 days to get fully hydrated if you're not a big water drinker. How much water do you need to drink? Well, the average male needs 3.7 liters a day. That includes the water you get from your food, right? But if you're not eating a lot of fruit and veggies, not a lot of water and a piece of chicken. Okay? So 3.7 liters a day for the average male, 2.7 for women. If you're not drinking that, you may not be fully hydrated. Not many of us are drinking that. So you want to hit that mark for 3 days before you go out in that high heat activity, right? And maintain it while you're in it. Plan that, okay? So if you're going to be out all day, I'm bringing 3.7 liters with me. And I'll bring an electrolyte replacement. Because there is a condition called hyponatremia. Okay? If you run out of salt, you can't absorb water. Hyponatremia is running out of salt. They call it water intoxication. I don't like that word, right? Because it's not very descriptive. But the way your cells work, the way they hydrate is based on what's called the sodium-potassium electrolyte pump. Look this up. The science is fascinating, right? The amount of sodium in your bloodstream dictates how much water can enter your cells, right? So if you ever heard of an isotonic solution means the salt in the liquid you've consumed is equal to the amount of salt, average amount of salt in a cell. So if you get saline, like an IV for dehydration or for hangovers, which is what most people are getting that by choice for, right? You can get those in Vegas now. That is an isotonic solution because that is the fastest way to safely hydrate, right? You say, what about potassium? So we don't sweat out potassium at the volume we do sodium, right? So if you see salt stains, you've probably had, if you've worked real hard in the heat before, you have salt stains on your hat or your shirt, right? So we lose salt in higher volume than potassium, and potassium is also regulates your heart rhythm. So you will die of a heart attack if you get too depleted of potassium before you will dehydration. So sodium is the most important thing to replenish in your drinks. And don't get a sugar-free electrolyte replacement if you are going to get one. Sugar will help you absorb it. It is a good delivery system. So if you're training in the heat, have 5 grams, 8 grams of sugar at least in your electrolyte supplement. So sodium, salt, really it's salt because chloride is a powerful electrolyte too, right? So salt is sodium and chloride, so that's great. So salt and potassium, and then from there if you can add calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate. Okay, those are the big 5. Those are really what we want in the best electrolyte supplements, okay? And that's not just going to help with hydration, it's going to help with all the symptoms of heat stress, the acid building up, the nausea, the cramping. It's going to help with a lot of that. Okay, there's plenty of ones out there. I'm a big Pedialyte guy. They got these new packets now that are great. It sucks that they have the artificial coloring, right? I know Liquid IV is great too. I don't like the flavor as much, right? I just don't like the flavor as much. Some are good. Liquid IV is a really, really good one. Again, I'm not sponsored by anybody. All you old school guys, or you military guys, fire guys, you know about Pedialyte. You know what's up with that. Okay, so we talked about a terrible, tragic death. I'll probably cut in some of the articles and like a shot of the letter where they mention the survival expert assisting with the investigation, right? That was, this guy here talking to you on camera. I hope you got some good survival tips out of this. So I'm going to talk about all kinds of subject matters and things that fascinate me as well, maybe some cultural topics, all that. It's not just going to be pure survival. I'm going to give you my survival tips the best I can, but it's called a survival expert on, right? So it may be some funny stuff. We have a combatives course. I may do a survival expert on MMA, right? A survival expert on social unrest, whatever, right? I've seen my fair share in my time on this earth. So if you did get this far, I really appreciate you watching or listening, however you got it. My name is Thomas Coyne, owner and chief instructor of Thomas Coyne Survival Schools, how apropos. The website is CA-Charlie-Alpha-survivaltraining.com, or you could spell it out, California, survivaltraining.com. Look for the name and the logo. We are often imitated, never duplicated. Okay? We have provided training for every single branch of the United States military, and we have the letters of appreciation to prove it. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you have a better understanding of what happened to this noble family that passed on, what happened to them, how they went, and I hope you have an understanding on how to make sure it doesn't happen to you. Again, my name is Thomas Coyne. Y'all take care.